Hello and welcome to Diverse and Delicious, a tour of the cultures and the cooking of Waterloo Region. I'm your co-host Diane Vernile.
And I'm your co-host Andrew Coppolino.
We have been exploring the many interesting international food choices now available locally, thanks in large part to the many immigrants who have made Waterloo Region their home. But before these newcomers arrived, the original residents of this land, the First Nations people, developed their own cuisine made up of what the good earth had to offer. Did you know, Andrew, that Waterloo Region is home to about 15,000 people who claim Aboriginal ancestry?
I did not know that, but it's certainly good to know. And that leads us to Cedar Spoon Indigenous Catering. Indigenous chef Daiene Moser comes from a large family, and she credits her grandmother for her inspiration to explore and cook Indigenous. We started with Cedar Braised bison short ribs. They're on the menu, and Daiene uses all Indigenous ingredients. So let's head into the kitchen. This episode comes to you from Bingaman's. It's a partnership between Chef Daiene Moser and Cedar Spoon Indigenous Catering. And just before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are situated on the Haldimand Tract along the beautiful Grand River. It's land that was granted to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River and is within the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee peoples. So thank you, Daiene, for inviting us to your kitchen. It's a partnership that you have with Bingaman's. That's really cool. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I have been cooking Indigenous food as part of my reconciliation journey, and Bingaman's had heard about me and they were doing an Indigenous art show. So I helped create the menu. It got amazing feedback. They asked me, what are you doing with this catering side and how are you bringing Indigenous food to the community? And I said, I don't know. I'm one chef. I don't have a commercial kitchen. I don't have a large staff. And so they basically said, you know, this is going to go somewhere. So we will let you use our staff, we'll let you use our facilities so that you can cook the food of the Indigenous people.
Now, this is just a prep kitchen, but it looks like you've got about 5,000 square feet here, and it's not even the big kitchen. So
Exactly.
That's an amazing opportunity, isn't it?
Exactly. So, you know, I sneak in here and there when I need to, but they've been really great at offering the space to me.
Now, we see a lot of really great mise en place here, stuff that's ready to be cooked. We'll get to that in a minute. The aromas that are already coming up from some of the pre-cooking that you've been done has been amazing. What drove you or what beckoned you to cook?
Yeah, so since I was a little kid, my family was farmers in our community, so that farm-to-table experience, 5 a.m., grandma waking up, the smell of a home-cooked meal. So it really started then. My family's quite large. My mom has about 110 cousins. My dad has 100 and something. And so food has been a major part of our upbringing, of our life. And as COVID hit, I really wanted to take the things I learned as a kid and actually do something with it. So I went to culinary school and I started.
You can drop the name.
Yes, sorry. I went to what was Liaison. It is now called Top Tukes.
Here in Kitchener. It's
here in Kitchener. So it was a perfect school for me to go to, especially during COVID when everything was shut down. And I really just wanted to put that title behind my name before I started cooking.
That's great. You mentioned the Truth and Reconciliation initiative, project, what we're all trying to understand more of. Where is your past in that? It's something that is something that's obviously marked you and has also inspired you.
Yeah, so I always knew I was Indigenous. I always knew I was Ojibwe. My mom's actually part of the 60s Scoop. So what that means is she's part of a group of kids that were taken from their communities, and then she was put through the foster care system for about 2 years, where she went through a lot of the same things that people in residential schools went through. So we've heard a lot about the residential schools. And then she was adopted here by a family in Waterloo Region, and that's where I was born.
Wow, wonderful that you're here and teaching us about some of the best food I think that we're probably going to eat on this show, because looking at these ingredients, the freshness, the variety of ingredients, and the smells and aromas, it's going to be great. So what are we cooking? What have you got picked out for us? And I guess how does it fit into what we would say is an Indigenous culinary larder?
Exactly. So basically I'm going to be making some bison short ribs, so similar to beef. Bison's actually indigenous to Canada, so it's currently listed as an exotic animal, which doesn't really make any sense since it comes from Canada. Cows, pigs, chickens came with the settlers. And so I really want to kind of come back to what is indigenous to Canada, and bison is a meat or a protein that's very close to beef. However, it has almost no saturated fat, makes it a lot healthier, less calories, and then it's also better for the environment overall.
And I noticed some some wild rice here. Now, wild rice isn't rice in the truest sense; it's more of a grass. But tell us more about it and how it fits into the panoply of wonderful ingredients that are here.
Exactly. So most of the time when people think of rice, they're thinking Asia. That's where a lot of our rice comes from. There's 4 different types of wild rices, and 3 of them are indigenous to Canada. A lot of them come from the Great Lakes. So this is the wild rice I'm using today is actually from a farm called Canadian Pure, and what they do is they handpick all of this wild rice, and then they ship it to you in this nice Ziploc bag just to show you how true it is to the farmers of Canada.
It does look very rustic and unprocessed, doesn't it? That's
exactly.
Great. Okay, so what do we need to do to put this whole dish together? We're going to start with some mise en place that needs to be done or finished up, and then I guess you got to do some sautéing, I think.
Yes, I'm going to take, so I have a bison short rib here, and I'm going to season it with some sea salt. And so now I'm going to add some pure maple sugar to this. So this really gives it that nice sweetness, it's earthy, and then it also helps give it that crust when you sear it off.
That's amazing. I mean, I've been to a lot of kitchens and I've seen a lot of prep like this done, but I've never seen sugar added to a piece of meat. But it makes a lot of sense. Like, the flavors are going to be wonderful.
Yeah, and traditionally pepper isn't indigenous to Canada. We do use juniper, so I really want to give it that extra smoky flavor as well.
Wonderful. Now we got to put this in a hot pan, I'm assuming?
Yep, we're going to put it in a hot pan, but instead of using like an olive oil, we're going to use sunflower oil because that is indigenous to Canada as well. You could use a vegetable oil, and it gets a really good, it has a really good high heat to it, so you're not going to, exactly.
Yeah, and isn't it wonderful to drive on the highway and see those fields of sunflowers perched looking at you?
Exactly, so we're going to add that in there.
That's a nice sear. That's a beautiful sear. And you just want to get that crispy on the outside, sear it all around, and then it's going to go in the oven. Is that what will happen? Okay.
Exactly. So we're going to brown it on all sides. And again, because I put that maple sugar on it, it's going to give it that nice kind of candy coating to it as well.
And I guess with a piece of meat like this that doesn't have a lot of fat in it, you got to pay a little particular attention to how it's cooking.
100%. So you really want to make sure that you don't over-sear it. And while it's cooking, we're going to do it at a braise, so it'll be really low and slow, 250 for about 3 hours.
Wow, that's a long time. Get all those connective tissues and things to break down in there, and you really build a really nice, soft, delicious meat, don't you?
Exactly. And so while that's searing, we're going to work on our mirepoix.
Okay.
So the mirepoix in the indigenous culture is traditionally a leek, a type of turnip, and maybe a squash.
Very different than a French mirepoix, isn't it?
Exactly. And so you could use, instead of leek, you could use wild onion. You could use shallots, too, if you don't have that on hand. So today I have shallots. I've got some turnip. And then I've also got some mushrooms that I'm using just for that meaty flavor.
The turnip is interesting because it'll add just a slight little bit of bitterness, I think, which is nice in a dish, isn't it? Especially if there's sweet in it.
Yes, exactly. And it also gives it some of that starch to help thicken the juice when we're done cooking.
Yes, yeah. And over here, that looks like some sage to me, which I know has a very special place in the indigenous larder as well.
Exactly. So we're just going to take that piece of meat off, and then we can add our mirepoix to that.
And we're going to pick up some of the caramelized bits beneath.
Exactly.
Just build those flavors.
Yes. And then the other thing I'm going to add to this, once I just kind of sear that off a bit, is some bison stock. So this is from bison bones. Just make this with a stock, but if you don't have this, corn stock is great. So when you have those corn on the cobs and you have the leftover cob, you can boil those down to make a really delicious corn stock.
That's a brilliant tip.
Thank you. And then as a personal chef, I obviously have a lot of waste when I'm cutting. So the ends of onions, the ends of carrots, carrot peels. So what I traditionally will do with that is then turn that into a stock as well. Part of the indigenous culture is no waste. And so I try to suck the life out of all those vegetables and do everything I can with it before.
A true steward of the land, right?
Exactly.
Well, that's great. I mean, that makes a lot of sense for anybody's kitchen, and especially in days and times when food is so expensive, you don't want to waste anything.
Exactly. So then once that's kind of done, gets to a boil, you just want to add your meat back in. And then from there, I'm going to add some sumac. And sumac gives us that lemon flavor to it. That traditionally you would get from lemon, but lemon's not indigenous to Canada, so we add some sumac.
And you've went to culinary school. You've attended culinary school. You've learned through the work that you do, but is there family cooking tips that you've gotten here, or is there grandmother's tips and tricks that you've learned?
For sure, like just even with the leftover vegetables and what to do with the bones when you're finished using them. A lot of that I learned from my grandmas about, let's make a stock with it. Let's use the vegetables to add, like anything that was the end pieces to add to a tomato sauce. So a lot of that I did learn growing up. And then through cooking school, what I found interesting was that even though Indigenous is Canadian, when we got to the international cuisines, they didn't even talk about Indigenous food. And so a lot of this I have had to learn through other Indigenous chefs across Canada, following their podcasts, their YouTube videos, reading their books. So a lot of this is me learning, and it's part of my reconciliation
I also
journey.
see a culinary instructor role for you somewhere.
Yeah, I actually am going into a few of the high schools over the next month just to talk about Indigenous food and the agriculture to reintroduce that to the next generation.
That is excellent. So what are we doing next? This is about a pretty heavy boil right now.
Yep.
What do we do next?
So it's got a good boil to it. So now I'm going to add the seasoning. So I talked about the sumac already. I'm also going to add a handful of sage, so that gives it that aroma. And then the other thing that is different too is the cedar. And
beautiful.
so cedar is all over Canada, and it is a medicine to the Indigenous people. So we use it for healing. We use it for teas, but this is going to be braised with the cedar, so it really gives it that earthy aroma.
Hence,
as well.
Cedar Spoon, Indigenous catering too.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons I named it Cedar Spoon.
And I can already start to get some smell off of that. That's just lovely.
Exactly, and then we're going to add the juniper, so that gives it kind of that peppery taste.
What is juniper? Is it a berry?
Juniper is a berry, and so you can usually find this at any specialty store. Again, a lot of these ingredients are at specialty stores, even though they are Indigenous. So I found this wonderful farm called Forbes Farm, and they have a lot of these ingredients like the maple sugar and the juniper berries.
Great.
The last thing I'm going to add to this is some maple syrup.
Oh, we wouldn't be without, where would we be without it?
Exactly. My family, part of them are from a Mennonite background, and so I'm pretty sure that you will be disowned if you don't have maple sugar syrup in your fridge. I know when I met my husband, I told him it was grounds for divorce if he brought Aunt Jemima into the house.
I noticed you're just sort of free pouring and all this stuff. You're just done this so many times that you just get a sense of what needs to go in at what time and how much.
Exactly. Like I've been writing down recipes because one of the things that my grandparents didn't necessarily leave us was recipes. It was all kind of from the heart, what tasted, a little of this, a little of that. So I've been trying really hard to start jotting some of that down.
Well, just as we finish up, I wanted to know personally from you, you spend a lot of time thinking about your past, thinking about your history, thinking about your culture, and then coupling that with cooking. How have those two things come together? What has it meant to you as a chef, but also as a person with Indigenous background, to be able to present this food to not just your family, and maybe not even just the Indigenous community, but really making a claim for this is Canadian food? What does that mean to you as a chef?
So for me, losing our culture and having it taken away from us was something that as a kid I didn't really recognize or know. You don't know what you don't know. And as I got older and I started to see some of the things that were happening to the Indigenous people, I really wanted to figure out how can I learn about that side of the culture. Like I said, my family's German. I know that side. And so learning about the culture for me, especially through food, was just the right avenue. I love food. It's my passion. It's my love language. It's a soul. It's medicine. So being able to learn about my culture through food has been a huge passion of mine. I feel like my mom passed away, so I feel like I'm also kind of finishing her reconciliation journey as well. And then in this crisis right now of food, why not start looking at the food of Canada and start looking at some of the laws that have prevented us from serving these and get it into our stores? It's in our own backyards.
All very well put, and I especially love the love language. That's terrific. So we should put this together, so can we just do a quick plating and we can get an idea of how it looks when it's finished?
For sure.
Andrew, that was really interesting and informative. Now, were you able to detect the various ingredients you were savoring there?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's a nicely complex dish. The bison is rich and deep, but a touch sweet from some maple syrup. And then you've got the juniper berries, some mushrooms, and a flavor foundation, a mirepoix of leek, turnip, and squash. And then you add to that the sage, and you have a flavorful dish with Indigenous Canadian ingredients. And now it's time to eat. Chef Destiny Moser of Cedar Spoon Indigenous Catering. I don't know how you've done this, but I've seen the ingredients go in, but I still get this little bit of truffle. I don't know how you've done it, but it tastes absolutely, or smells absolutely amazing. So tell us, what is this dish? How would you present it to a diner?
So today we've made a cedar braised bison, and I've put some sumac on it. There is some sage, the cedar obviously, and then the maple syrup, lots of mushrooms. So again, that's probably where you're getting that smell.
I can't believe it, because this is a pot roast like cook. It takes a long time in a braise, but it is so tender. It is so rich. There's a sort of a smokiness and earthiness to it. You pick up a hint of the mushrooms. They sort of are punctuating the wild rice, which has a kind of nice grassiness. I'm talking with my mouth full, I apologize. And I just love the way that it all comes together. It's a beautiful, beautiful dish. What would you serve with this as a beverage? For instance,
So a great beverage would, especially at this time of year, it's winter, would be a winter sour. So you take some of those wild blueberries, they may be frozen. You mix that in with a lemon sour if you have it. It would be awesome if you had the verjus, but it's hard to come by.
Yeah.
And then a little maple syrup and some water.
I just love that there's about 5 ingredients that I can almost go out in my backyard and pick up, like the cedar, the mushrooms, the sage. It's just wonderful, and I really like the way you've balanced off the flavors here. The thing that hits me the most as a guy who eats a lot is the hint of sweetness that's there. I think it's from that maple sugar. It's a beautiful creation. Thank you so much for showing us your cuisine, your personality, and your food.
Thank you.
Andrew, Destiny mentioned a summer sour drink to go with the bison ribs. Now, to your taste, is that a good fit?
Oh, well, I'll confess that I'm partial to sourness and bitterness. There are 2 flavors, I think, that are underused. A touch of sour with the bison's deeper, earthy flavors, I imagine that would work quite well.
And that is a nice segue into our next segment, Andrew.